It's Michael Ankrah, founder of Hackner Education and author of Learning Naturally. So this is going to be the second in this series of videos that I'm going to be recording with regards to the new book that I'm writing. And in this session, I really want to zone in on what I want to call the making of a slave, or the conditioning of the slave mindset. Now, I'd like to start by saying that nobody was born with a particular mindset. We were all created equal. All human beings are endowed with the same natural human organs, so the brains and everything, they are all the same. So then the question is, how does it become that some people go on to do things quite differently whilst others seem not to be able to do anything? And as I said in my previous video, it all comes down to the way in which we think and think about ourselves. So it comes in two folds. It's about how we think of ourselves and how we think of our place in the world, or how we interact with the world and other people. And today I want to zone in on how we get conditioned, how a person or a human being is conditioned into that slave mindset. Now, I'm going to be using the slave mindset a lot. So I would like to paint a vivid picture of what it means for one to have a slave mindset. And once again, I would like to take you back to their plantation. Now, the African slaves that were taken from West Africa and, sent to the Caribbean, to go and work on the plantation, were not, expecting the conditions that they faced. Now, all cultures have had some idea or the usage of the term slave, but it would mean different things to different people. So even though before the arrival of the European slavers, Africans knew the concept of slave, because when they fought wars, slaves are captured and they get to do things. They don't have a lot of, rights like citizens and all that. But the concept which was introduced by the European slavers were quite different. And to understand how the slave mindset works, I think we'll go onto the plantation and look at a slave that has been captured from the time of captivity all through the journey, and then till the time that they arrive on the plantation, the manner in which they are made to work and live would depict how a slave thinks. And you could see from the very beginning that once a person is captured and is made a slave, their identity, their dignity, they are deprived of choice. So the number one ingredient which sort of signifies the slave mentality, the slave mindset, is when people feel that they do not have any choice. And in the case of the slaves who were taken over to the Caribbean, they indeed do not have a choice, because any attempt to not follow the instructions of the masters or the slavers could lead to your death or some really, really serious consequences. So indeed, they had no choice. So that is the number one, a characteristics of what it means to be a slave. And number two, they are expected to follow very, very strict orders. So right from the time that they are captured to when they are put on the ships, there are those who will go on the lower deck, which is usually the men, and they are arranged in a certain way. You have to be in a certain order as expected. Women are placed at a certain level. Again, the order, the control by the slave masters is to show that I am in charge. I am going to tell you what to do. And the slaves do not have, again, a choice in what they do. They have to follow instruction even about how they live, where they place themselves physically. They don't have any control over that. So in terms of their personal freedoms and liberties, they lose that. But even in terms of managing their own spaces, they lose that freedom as well. And then when it comes to what does the slave do on the plantation day and day, who decides the slave's schedule? They have no input. Their time of starting and ending is determined by the masters. And what is good is also determined by the masters. And therefore you could see that it can actually be a moving goalpost. If you happen to be not in the good books of the master, then you are going to be in trouble, because you can never meet the expectation of a moving goalpost. So in effect, what happens is that to create a slave, slave masters have to go through a process of, if you like, taming. Okay, the process is akin to taming a horse or taming a wild animal. I mean, we are all part of the animals, so we talk of planted animals, and human beings are animals in that sense. But to make a human being a slave is akin to trying to tame the human being. And what does it mean to tame something or to tame an animal? Basically, when we say we are taming an animal, it is basically to make the subject, if it is a dog, if it is a lion, if it's an elephant, if it is a human being, is to make them respond to events and situations in the way that the master expects. Now, if you think of the conditioning of the slave's mind like this, then you would realize that even though there are no plantations today as they were in the past, we still have a system where people's minds are gradually conditioned right from the time of their birth through their, being toddlers, young people, and everything till they become adults. And indeed, by the time you become an adult, you have been conditioned to respond to situations and events in the way that not you expect, but in the way that you feel will be acceptable to the system, to your masters, to whoever is in charge. So it is really, really crucial that we begin to then understand, because like I said, there are no slaves like we had in the time of the transatlantic slave trade or masters in that regard. What we have is that we find ourselves in the gray area where there are master slaves and slave masters. And what do I mean by this? It's just simply this, that for instance, if you are a dad and then you go home and you begin to act with the authority of a master where people around you, your children, your spouses, do not have any choice, and it has to be according as you say, so it's just a dictatorship, and they know they have to do that, and failure for them to do that would be like it was for the slaves. There will be severe consequences, so people fall in line. So in that sense, the dad is acting like a master, but then that dad will go to work in the morning, and then they become like the slave for the system wherever they are working, where they have no choice in anything that they do, and they just have to follow the rigorous routine that has been set for them.